I qualified as an expert mortar gunner. And upon graduation from AIT, my platoon sergeant asked me if I was interested in going to the NCO Academy. And I said, "What does that entail?" He said, "Well, I was promoted to PFC the last day of AIT. He said, "You'll be promoted to corporal and you'll go to Fort Benning, Georgia. And there's an academy there. Your MOS, military occupational specialty, will change from mortars to light infantry. And if you graduate, you'll be a sergeant in E5." So I went ahead and I did that. One of the reasons I did it, I thought maybe by the time I finished the academy, maybe there wouldn't be so many people going to Vietnam. But
Right.
that,
Yeah.
that was a mistake. I was a PFC one day. The next day, I was a corporal. And then 5 months later, I was a sergeant.
And by the time you're E5 sergeant, you'd been in the Army less than a year, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I want to jump ahead and ask about the challenges of that because correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming you show up as an E5 sergeant and some of the guys, under your command as a sergeant have a lot more experience in country than you do, just because you're new and they've been there a while. I'm assuming all of this. And so if that's right, I'm wondering what challenges there were showing up as a sergeant with soldiers, you know, under you in terms of the Army hierarchy who have a lot more experience in country. What challenges did that present?
Well, we were called shake and bake sergeants.
Yeah.
uh, and in the rear, and I had a I had a 9 week on the job training back at Fort Polk with a mortar platoon before before we went to Vietnam. We all went back for training. So it was the sergeants there at Fort Polk, the lifers, uh, they wouldn't have anything to do with us. If we went to the NCO club, they would make snide remarks and stuff like that. But then when I got to the field, the guys that I went in as a fire team leader, and my fire team, they were all seasoned. They'd been in really heavy combat earlier in the month that I got there. And most of them had been there for TET 68. And they were very receptive and really willing to train me, along with the squad leader, was willing to train me because it was to their advantage, to bring me along as quickly as they could. And they did that. I didn't really see any animosity in the field, not like the rear. The rear was different, but not in the field.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They wouldn't, it's not that they're really interested in your career and all of this, but it's in their interest for you to get caught up as quickly as you can, right? And so that's why they're helping you out.
Yes.
Yeah. When did you actually arrive in Vietnam?
It was around June 20th, I believe,
Oh,
68.
68.
Yeah.
So I know it's hard, the beginning of TED is easy to identify. Exactly when it ends is a little um, murky. Um, at that time, June 68, when you look back, did it seem like, TED was still reverberating in some ways where you were in the Central Highlands?
Uh, Things had calmed down some by the end of June. On June the 3rd, the company I went to in a big battle that their base camp had been attacked, and the perimeter, actually it was a battalion base camp. The perimeter had been breached. My company had to go to another part of the perimeter, and they were able to repel the North Vietnamese and get them back outside of the perimeter. So they were still in the aftermath of that. Things had calmed down though quite a bit from then.
What was your first impression of Vietnam after arriving in Cameroon?
I I didn't know what to expect. I had a window seat, and I thought, I didn't know if I was going to see green tracers coming up at the airplane, or, but we came in over the water, landed. When they opened the door, the humidity and the heat just came inside the cabin of the aircraft, and it was kind of it got your attention.
Yeah.
And we went down the steps. The first thing I saw when I got off the aircraft was a Jeep with two Air Force guys wearing swimming trunks, and they had two surfboards in the back of their Jeeps. And I thought to myself, I don't think I'm going to be stationed here.
How long was it before you saw, heard, or experienced something that drove home to you that, despite these guys with their surfboards, that you really were in a war zone?
I think when I got to the first Firebase, it was Firebase Mile High, and from Cameron Bay we went to Pleiku by C-130. I was there long enough to get outfitted with equipment, and then there were quite a few of us going up to Mile High, and they took us up on a Chinook, a CH-47 Chinook, and that was my first helicopter ride. Uh, when I got to the Firebase, that's when I realized, this is a combat zone. We had bunkers on the military crest of the hills. They assigned me to a bunker with some of the people in my fire team. There was a quad 50 machine gun above us and right behind us, and it was a whole different. Pleiku was like being on a military base somewhere, Campanari. That's when I started hearing the stories about Tet, June the 3rd, from these guys.
What was your impression of them? I mean, I'm sure you can bring to your mind's eye, you get off that Chinook, you start walking around this base and, getting situated, um, meeting the guys that you're going to be working with and working among. What was your first impression of them, these guys who'd been there a while, these guys who'd been through that battle on June the 3rd?
I was thinking, I need to learn from these guys. And it's funny because you're on this big fire base, you have other companies are up there, but you're still isolated with your own group. Even within the platoon, you're isolated with your own fire team and your own squad. And guys didn't really intermix. So you have your one little section, maybe a couple of bunkers, two or three bunkers, and that's what you know. The first firefight I was in wasn't much of a firefight. It was July 4th, 1968. And our platoon was going out with a scout dog on a trail, actually looking for North Vietnamese. I mean, that's why we were on the trail, and that's why we had the scout dog. And I was the fire team leader then, and they put my fire team in front. My guy was walking point. I had a grenadier behind him. I was walking third. And scout dog was up with the point man. And scout dogs were German shepherds, and they alerted to the smell in the air. We came across some signs, and then not too long after that, the dog alerted. And just a few seconds later, four Viet Cong came down the trail facing us, and the point man, the scout dog guy, opened up. I wasn't in a position to fire. They killed two of them. The other two ran off through the brush, and we never saw them again. And it turned out one of the guys that was killed, they knew him because he sold soda at Campanari at Pleiku. When we got back from that patrol, that's when I was promoted to squad leader. My squad leader was promoted to platoon sergeant of that platoon. And then I changed from first platoon to third platoon. So I was a squad leader in third platoon.
I want to ask you a couple questions about things you just said. So, had the dog been trained to smell, um, smell Viet Cong NVA, which I assume would be, related to things that were in their diet that would lead to particular smells that a human might not be able to pick up, but a dog would. Had the dog had been trained to pick up smells that would be associated with, I get, Vietnamese. Is that what you mean that the dog would pick up smells, or would it be the smells
Yeah.
of ammunition or uh,
No, I think
like that?
I think it was the Vietnamese because I mean, we could pick up the smell also if we were close enough to them, but the dog could get it so much farther away.
And then you said that in addition to the dog alerting, that there were other signs. Um,
We found a place where somebody had defecated and covered it over with a little bit of dirt, and it was very fresh.
Now this you said here we have four Viet Cong. Are you dealing with Viet Cong and NVA throughout your tour, or was it primarily NVA?
Primarily in VA. That was the only time we encountered Viet Cong when I was there.
You do a lot of operations by the Cambodian border, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, we did, and also the Laotian border, but mostly the Cambodian border.
Now I think here we're in 68 going into 69. Did you have to deal with the rules of engagement that, you know, basically, once the enemy are back across the border, there's nothing you can do about it?
Yeah, yeah, we did. There were times when we did go into Cambodia uh, unofficially. The only reason I know that because when we did that, only the officers had maps. Usually, all the squad leaders and the officers had maps. But when we went into Cambodia, the squad leaders, platoon sergeants didn't have maps, but the officers did. But the captain told me we were in Cambodia. There was one time a helicopter was shot down across the border. They were from the 119th, and that was a bad situation. We were on landing zone Duco or Joan at Duco outside the Special Forces camp, and Captain Tower took my platoon and second platoon, I believe. It took quite a few of us. They just left enough people back at Duco to man the perimeter. Yeah, because we had 15 Hueys that flew us in, and he told us we were in Cambodia when we got there. I had 9 guys in my squad, and he had me stay and secure the perimeter with one Huey. Then he told me if that ship's going to leave, you go with it. And then they went to try to find the downed helicopter. They had a general idea where it was, but it didn't turn out to be there. They were still out looking for the helicopter. It was turning dusk, and one of the pathfinders told me that they were going to have to take off. And so I talked to the crew chief, and he said, "Okay, we'll get the ship ready to go, and then you can pull your guys in." Well, I had 9 guys. There were 2 pathfinders. It's 11. The crew chief and the door gunner was 13, and the pilot and the co-pilot 14
Mhm.
or 15.
15.
Uh, and we took off. And as we got above the treetops, we could see a ring of lights around us. We were completely surrounded by light, by people with lights and uh, like flashlights. And my only thought was that they didn't know how small a unit we were protecting that ship. Otherwise, they probably could have overrun us easily if they wanted to.
So the lights were NBA.
Yeah, I'm sure they were. One thing we started doing that we hadn't been doing before under the other company commanders was we would dig in every night when we were humping, and we would put on overhead cover over our holes. And you're humping all day. You got 60 plus pounds on your back. You hump until you're exhausted. Then you have to dig in, and then on top of that, you have to put on overhead cover. So guys grumbled about it, and they didn't like it. And then one night we were dug in with overhead cover. Alpha Company was on the hill next to us. They were dug in. They didn't have overhead cover. And a spotter plane started flying above us. And then we started taking artillery. Well, all the artillery units that we had said it wasn't theirs. The South Vietnamese said it wasn't theirs. As far as I know, we never learned who it was. But Alpha Company had several casualties, and we didn't have any basically because of the overhead cover on our holes. So after that, the guys didn't grumble about putting overhead cover on.
What was the overhead cover? Is it branches and things like that?
There'd be logs. We'd cut down trees with machetes and small logs, put them over, and then put sandbags on top of them.
Yeah, I could see how that's a lot. That is a lot of extra work.
There was a special forces camp at Duco. There was intelligence that there was going to be an armor attack from across the border on that camp. So our company went there and we put up a perimeter outside of their perimeter, outside of the camp. And that was called LZ Joan. It was right on Highway 19, which was a dirt road. On the other side of the road, there was an airstrip, and there was a disabled tank at the end of the airstrip, and there were unmarked helicopters. And every night they would fly over into Cambodia. And we didn't know what they did. And then sometimes they would relocate a village, and you'd see a C-130 come in. They'd drop down the gate in the back, the ramp, and you'd see people get off leading water buffalo and relocating the whole village. But we don't know where they went. We never saw them again. As far as the special forces guys, we never really had any interaction with them. They were advising the CIDGs, the Civilian Irregular Defense Forces group, and they were Montagnards. They weren't South Vietnamese. They were Montagnards. And they were good fighters, and they were honest. One thing that happened while we were there, every so often we were able to buy cases of soda from the rear for 10 cents a can, $2.40 a case. It was very rare that we had that opportunity, but special forces could get it anytime they wanted. So they had, inside their camp, they had a whole pallet of beer and soda, and they would sell it to us for $20 a case if we wanted. And one day we started hearing mortar tubes popping up on a hill, and the mortar rounds started coming down. And of course, we ran for our bunkers. We were in our bunkers. Well, none of the rounds landed inside our perimeter, but one round landed inside the special forces perimeter, and it was right on top of that pallet of beer and soda. And I heard a big cheer go up from the guys I was on the opposite side of the perimeter, so I couldn't see that. But I heard a big cheer go up from the guys that were on that side of the perimeter when that thing hit the beer and soda.
They feel like the special forces guys have been gouging them with with their ridiculous prices.
Oh, yeah.
Did you do any operations with South Vietnamese forces?
Not with them. There were times when we had to reinforce them on fire bases. There was an artillery fire base that was their artillery. They had the perimeter. They were expecting an attack, so we had to set up our own perimeter outside of their perimeter. So we dug holes, built bunkers. So we were supposed to be the buffer between them and the North Vietnamese. We didn't like it because we did get a hot meal when we were there. One hot meal a day. We ate sea rations twice a day. But we had to leave somebody on every one of our bunkers during mealtime because we found out that when we didn't, they would come down and steal stuff steal our equipment and steal, writing paper and envelopes and personal property if we didn't leave somebody on.
I think you've kind of answered this question, but based on your experience, what was your assessment of the South Vietnamese forces that you worked around?
We didn't think much of them. We were leery of them, which was completely opposite of the CIDGs, which were with the special forces.
So the sieges you found were impressive, but the South Vietnamese forces, at least the ones you worked among, not so much.
Yeah, that was my opinion. Yes,
What was your opinion of the NBA?
they were good fighters. Uh, they we had respect for them. We figured most of them were probably drafted like most of us were, and probably didn't want to be there either. But they were good fighters. They'd been fighting 20 years at least. With the French and then the Americans.
Sure.
Uh, yeah, we had respect for them.
My understanding is that you spent a lot of time on operations similar to the LERP. So though you're not a LERP, but the idea of these guys go out and they are to avoid combat if they can, that they're primarily looking, gathering information, spotting the enemy, and then reporting that back. Is that right? That a lot of your missions were like that, basically about going out and finding the enemy and reporting back?
Yeah, quite a few. They called them SRPs, short range patrols, or short range reconnaissance patrols. Four of us would go out for 3 days to a predetermined location and just look for the enemy and avoid contact. We were supposed to. Sometimes, even though we were ordered not to make contact, when we would spot them, call in their position, we had one captain that wanted us to make contact with them, and that happened one time, and I actually called for a gunship. Turned out it was a huge base camp we had stumbled upon. The North Vietnamese left it. We went in there the next day, the four of us, and we found a bunch of documents and that we took back with us. We found, I mean, they had bunkers, they had sleeping quarters, all kinds of stuff there, and there were no bodies. So I don't know. I don't think the gunship killed any of them. If they did, then they took them away. If they had, I don't know.
Yeah.
But at least the gunship was covering us, and because they knew we were there, one of their guys saw us, and he was up in a tree, and he left the tree and ran down there. He didn't snipe at us, so I think he just wanted to warn the rest of them.
So you go out on a mission and you're out for 3 days. Does that mean that you're walking, very, very slowly, making no noise through the day, and then you stop at night, or are you going to one location and staying in that one location the whole time?
We'd stay in the one location unless there was a reason to move, uh, and we would stay. Is normally it was about 3,000 meters from our perimeter, from our landing zone or wherever camp we came from, and we would have to verify our location, and then I don't remember if it was every hour, every half hour while we were there, we would get a call from the company radio telephone operator. He would call each of the teams that were out, and if the situation was negative, if nothing was going on, to break squelch twice. So my RTO would break squelch on the handset twice, and then they would know that we were okay.
With you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so, if you're in place for 2 or 3 days, um, it might seem like a strange question, but how do you pass your time?
Somebody's always watching. Guys would, write letters. Maybe if they had mail, maybe they'd read their mail. Because we had to stay quiet. There wasn't a lot of talking going on. There was a lot of watching. And one time, we were hiding. Basically, we were out there hiding and observing a certain location. One time we were, it sounded like maybe a squad coming through the leaves near us.
Of NBA?
Yeah, that's what we thought. And we got down. We had Claymore mines set out just in case. And we're waiting and waiting, and they're getting closer and closer. And they got to where we could see them. And it was four or five of these big birds. They were like maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, and they were scratching in the leaves and probably looking for bugs and worms and stuff
Right.
as they were walking along. It was such a relief to see them. On Valentine's Day, 69, our battalion commander we were on a fire base, I think it was called Lily, and it was a hill. It was rocky. The only flat spot on it was just big enough to land a helicopter. And our battalion commander was coming in, and he had been shot at from down below somewhere. So he landed, and we went down to the area where the shot had come from. And as we were walking along, we came upon a bunker complex. It was really well camouflaged, and they opened up on us with machine gun and small arms fire. So we hit the ground. We looked for what cover we could find, and that's when I could see somebody in a bunker kept popping up, and I fired a round, and he fired back, and I fired another round, and I tried to fire a third round. Nothing happened. So I pulled the charging handle back on my rifle, and as I did, I turned it sideways and I looked, and there was a bullet hole coming out the side of my magazine. Well, and then I looked at my shirt sleeve, and there was a bullet hole through my shirt sleeve. So the bullet had gone in the magazine well, came out the side, and went through my shirt sleeve. And Lieutenant Kelly was off to the right of me 2 places, and he said, "Here, trade with me." And so he was the only one in our group that had a bayonet. I gave him my rifle. He gave me his rifle. He put his bayonet on my rifle, and he kept it. And then I had 2 guys that were in a position where they could see the bunker very well, and they had cover. They wanted a M72 Law. That's an anti-tank weapon. And so I was carrying a Law. So I crawled on the ground up to where they were, but there was not enough cover for 3 people there. And the Law has a backblast. So then I crawled back to a tree that was near where I was before. And they fired the Law at the bunker, and it turned out to be a dud, or it didn't go off. Probably several reasons why it didn't go off. It might have just buried itself in the dirt of the bunker. But then the second platoon came in from the right flank with machine guns, and the NVA all took off, ran away. We went down off the top, and we were doing sweeps, and we came to a plateau that overlooked Campanari in Pleiku, and there were rocket launchers set up on this plateau, and there were tracks like there had been a lot of people there, and the rocket launchers were aimed at the 71st Evacuation Hospital down at Pleiku. So there was a trail coming to there. So we went back. We followed the the boot prints and all back along that trail, and we set up an ambush. We found an area where we could set up an ambush. There were 23 of us, I think, in the platoon at that time, and 3 squads. So one squad was facing the trail. My squad was on the flank. I had 3 positions, 2 on the flank and 1 position on the back. And then the other squad had another position on the back and then 2 on the other flank. And I don't know, midnight, 11 o'clock, midnight sometime, I heard all this noise. And Dennis Brierton, my RTO, was on watch. And I said, "What's that noise, Dennis?" He says, "It might be a second platoon coming in." I said, "Well, they better be quiet. They're giving our position away." And then we hear a Claymore mine blow on the other side, and a machine gun opens up over there. And North Vietnamese ran. It was very dark that night, super dark. This North Vietnamese ran in, fell in our foxhole, climbed out again, and ran through our perimeter and out the other side. And he was jabbering something. I mean, because I'm sure he didn't know what was going on either. And so all night long, we're getting probed and we're throwing hand grenades, and we're not using our rifles that much because we can't see more than 10 feet in front of us, and muzzle flash would just give away our position. And earlier, when we were digging our holes in the day, Jerry Gamble was one of our grenadiers, one of my grenadiers. And I asked him, I said, "You see that tree there, Jerry?" I said, "That's a good place for cover. Uh, so make a note of where it is, because if we start taking fire, we might get fire from there." Well, we started seeing muzzle flashes coming from where that tree was. So Jerry fired a grenade over there, and it hit the tree, and bam, exploded. Well, all night long we had probing. Daylight came, and they're gone. There were rockets laying. There were a few rockets laying on the ground. Mostly we'd thrown hand grenades, and we heard, we'd throw a grenade, we'd hear it explode, and we'd hear somebody, moan or cry or something like that. But then in the morning they're gone. Except we were doing patrol sweeps around us. Well, we found a guy behind that tree. He was just sitting there. He was crying, and his rifle was there, and his thumb was blown off. So actually, our medic took care of him, and then we turned him over. A helicopter came in and took him to the rear somewhere. I guess they got a lot of intelligence out of him.
When you saw that NBA soldier, just as you remember that, because you can bring all of this to your memory, so there it is. You can see it right now. Is your disposition toward that NBA soldier indifference, contempt, respect for a fellow warrior? How would you describe your own disposition toward him at that moment?
We didn't. I didn't think much about him personally. We wouldn't abuse when we took prisoners. We would never abuse them. That wasn't reciprocated, but we wouldn't do it. I mean, we weren't brought up that way. We didn't think it was our place to try to punish them. We were trying to take them out of battle, but they were going to send rockets into a hospital, and this was the company that was going to do it. But we mostly were thinking about staying alive ourselves.
So you returned home June 69?
Yes.
And how long did you have left in the Army?
I had less than a month, and so they processed me through. I came into McCord Air Force Base in Washington, bussed over to Fort Lewis. They processed us that day, and I went home the next day.
So you go from Vietnam to being a civilian like 3 days later?
Yeah.